All right, another jam-packed spring training edition of the Shea Anything podcast about to begin. We'll talk extensions. What's the latest with Lindor and Conforto? We'll talk a potential Michael Conforto trade. Yes, no, you heard me right. We'll visit it as a potential topic. Also, we'll talk about 3 Mets relievers and how solid the foundation is for them to make the Mets roster as we move north and break out of camp in Port St. Lucie. Shea Anything podcast starts now.
Great tease.
Welcome to the show, everybody. Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you this week. Andy, hello.
Doug.
Hello.
We were discussing before we came on how we don't like each other behind the scenes, just like Mike and Mike used to be.
Well, you would have thought that had you watched our exchange as the Zoom began. It was, hello, Andy. Hello, Doug. And then just like kind of silence for a little while.
I'm feeling a little distracted and anxious today, so I wasn't my normal bubbly self.
Why are you distracted and anxious?
I don't know. You ever just get like a wave of anxiety where you're not quite yourself on a given day?
Well, yeah, all the time. Yeah,
I got one of those today.
Only all the time.
Yeah.
Just a reminder: subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate it once again. Andy's on a couple times a week, and I host Baseball Night New York. That's weeknights at 6 o'clock on SNY. It's been really fun lately to have guys like Omar Minaya and Terry Collins and some new panelists on the show. We asked Terry some ridiculous questions on Friday, which was really fun.
I watched that. I loved Terry on the show. You could tell he was having fun too.
Yeah, and what's really funny, Andy, you were on his first show, so you know that his first Zoom connection at his place in Florida was like an oil painting, and then his nephew set him up with like a legit setup at his nephew's place, and he looked like he was in 4K.
Oh, he looked incredible. I noticed that too. I didn't know that was the difference, but I'm glad to hear that because Terry's like such a good talker, and when he buys into something, like he could be cranky too, but he's not cranky on BNMI. He's buying into it, and then he has the potential to be incredible TV, but not if he's freezing every 2 seconds. So I'm glad to hear he's found a solution for that.
I should say in case it goes wrong, I get the blame and I get the credit if it goes well. But we're gonna do the next time he comes on and kind of going forward. We're going to do a segment called In the Jackpot where we just kind of like pepper Terry with questions.
When is that? What day?
I don't know the next time he's on. It's probably this week at some point.
I really hope I'm on that one. I actually got jealous of you. Like I turned the TV on Friday at 6 and I saw Terry and I was like, I want to be on that show. I love the man. I love his company.
Honestly, he is like, talking to him is really refreshing. Hearing his voice on the show, it's great to have him and his voice back in our Mets
Omar too.
Baseball content.
Those are 2 people that make you smile. And by the way, oh my God, incredible natural transition. Speaking of BNNY cast members, I'm watching Jerry Blevins come into the game as we speak. Here in the
he's pitched pretty well so far this spring. Last I saw, you have 3 ERA.
Yeah, he just came in with runners in the corners and 1 out. I'm watching the Astros Mets on AT&T Sportsnet. I'm glad our company's not called that. ATTSN doesn't roll off the tongue like SNY does.
Yeah, well, that's a good promotion for our employer.
That's right.
Okay, so let's get into the extensions first. Extensions for everybody. Jeff thinks this is like a hilarious name for a segment that like everybody gets an extension. It's like Oprah. When in reality, it's Lindor and Conforto, and there's a lot we don't know. However, I'm willing to play up the energy of the segment just to make Jeff happy, Andy. So Lindor update, Conforto update. Let's go.
Lindor update is the Mets offered him just less than $300 million. SNY reported this on Friday. He countered once with significantly more than that. There's going to be a problem if he wants Tatis type money, I think. I don't think the Mets will give it to him. So we're really interested to see how that plays out over the next really like days. He's got that hard deadline. There definitely reason to wonder, like, really, you won't take our $310 million on April 10th? Okay, but he won't, according to him. So we'll find out how that's going to go pretty soon. Mets like him. They want to sign him. They don't sign him. They'll sign someone else this winter. That's how they feel about it, truly. So that's what's going on there. They're negotiating.
For the record, I think you'll find this interesting. He also mentioned it on the air in the booth, but Keith thinks the opening day deadline is basically BS. He thinks.
Well, we'll find out.
He thinks it's, and you would know better than I would if there's any truth to this and how often this happens. But he thinks Lindor is saying that to apply even an ounce more of pressure, whether it's public and not real or actually real, on the Mets, even though, yeah, obviously if he gets the exact contract he wants a week into the season, he'll take it.
We'll see. I understand what Keith's saying. That's logical. We just don't know for sure. I was surprised. I was thinking the same way as Keith. So I was somewhat surprised in the recent Lindor Zoom when he was very firm about it. He was like, I will go to free agency. It's like, oh, okay, you meant that. I thought he might give a little wiggle room at that time. So that's what the Mets have to go by now. I can tell you they're internally operating as if that deadline is real. But also, like I said, there is a little bit of like, we're going to offer you. We are offering you a lot of money here. You sure we can't talk about this a little bit after that day? So we'll see. It wouldn't shock me if there was some kind of joint statement or leak the night before opening day saying they mutually agreed to extend the window or something like that. Wouldn't be crazy to think that could happen. But like I said, Lindor has been firm and Conforto hasn't. I called Scott Boras on Friday and said, does Conforto have this deadline? And Boras declined to say that he did. He hasn't told the Mets privately that they did. So, or that they do. So there isn't any such deadline on Conforto. They've given themselves that wiggle room.
What a funny idea that I hadn't thought of, a joint statement that they've agreed to continue, which makes sense though. If you're Lindor's camp, you feel like you're getting somewhere in negotiations. It's bad business to then be like, nope, sorry, pencils down.
Right.
So I could see that happening too. That would make a lot of sense if they feel like they're actually going back and forth and that they're not stalled in negotiations. So that's your Conforto update too, that Boras told you it's what he didn't tell you that you find interesting, that maybe we could go into the season with a negotiation for Conforto.
I said to Boras directly, like, want to ask you directly, does you have this deadline that Lindor has? And he said, Michael's focused on the season and like passing on the opportunity to say, yes, there's a deadline. And it's been the same with the Mets. So they're going back and forth. I'd be pretty surprised. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a direct parallel. I was about to say I'd be surprised if Conforto signed before opening day, but I'm going to backtrack on that actually, because this is the parallel to when they were negotiating contract extensions in 2012 with David Wright and R.A. Dickey. This was in the offseason, not spring training, but the same thing. And it was Alderson obviously doing it then as well. You're negotiating in good faith on two different tracks with two different players. And when you're in the middle of that, you don't know which one, or if you're going to go 0 for 2 or 1 for 2 or 2 for 2, you don't know. And something could happen with one of those players that impacts what you're willing to do with another. They could end up with a great agreement that everyone feels great about with Conforto, and that could change what they're willing to spend on Lindor. Or they could say, hey, we're not going to sign Conforto. It's clear to us. So therefore, let's put all our eggs in the Lindor basket and up that offer a little. These things are sort of interrelated a little bit. So although they're not, they're parallel tracks, but they're interrelated in the sense that naturally they could affect one another. And that's why it's hard to predict which one's going to end up in an actual agreement, if any.
Okay. I'm going to, Jeff, you're sitting down, luckily. I'm going to move down in the rundown and then come back. Okay. Jeff and our digital department seems to be able to know what the world is Googling. This is a new capability of technology that I realized was possible.
Like a backend thing you can do?
In coming up with a topic for this little podcast, we were able to know what the world cares about. And what the world apparently has just begun searching is, over the past 7 days, on the U.S. baseball web search. Do I have that right, Jeff? Yeah, he shrugs. I don't know.
Sound like you're translating that into a different language.
People
US baseball.
People are Googling Mets trade Conforto. It's a rising search over the past 7 days.
Okay.
Again, I didn't realize that we were like a government research program, but apparently we are. And we know that people are starting to wonder if Conforto is going to get traded after all this. Do you see that as a possibility?
Is this like a Google business feature? Like you have access to this kind of data?
Again, very high tech. Do we have professional microphones? No, but we are monitoring your Googles. We are in your homes.
That's right. We're like a smart TV. We're listening to everything. We know what you want to know about the Mets. Would they trade Michael Conforto? Sure, if he's not part of the future. I think there's a good chance he will be part of the future, but they don't know. Look, it's the same thing I said with Lindor. The Mets are like, hey, we're going to spend. Maybe it's on Conforto, maybe it's not. We'll see if we can come up with an agreement that we feel is good agreement. If they move on, could they trade him? Absolutely. And I don't think that would be more likely if they were out of the race in July, of course, which I don't expect to be the case. But there are plenty of creative trades made with good major league players that contending teams make. I mean, obviously this is high speculation. This is not. I'm not saying that there's anything to this right now, but I'm saying if the Mets were to conclude that they're not signing Conforto, he will become a free agent. Then you'd of course be open to trades come July. Yeah.
Even if you're still in it.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you remember when the Red Sox and the A's traded Lester for Cespedes when they were both in a pennant race? I mean, it's more often to have buyers and sellers, but you often have teams that sort of, trade pieces off their team to acquire pieces if need. It could happen. I
know you're not saying you
Probably
think
not.
This is going to happen or anywhere close to it. The conversation that you and I had, I forget if it was on the podcast or kind of off the air, about the Major League Baseball player who gets to the big leagues and decides, I want to be in a position of leadership, not only to represent my team, but represent the league. And Conforto's doing that, him coming up when Sandy was the GM, his growth in the organization, his participation the last time they went on a World Series run. I doubt it happens due to all of that. And it's already obviously a long shot anyway. What were you going to say?
Well, with one thing that I disagree, I get your overall point, but being on the executive board of the union is not a plus for any team management. That is a major negative. If you're looking at from a team's perspective, he is a general of the enemy army in the labor wars.
But you don't think Sandy is the type of guy who respects that?
I don't want to speak for Sandy. No, I think that Sandy respects Conforto's overall maturity and intelligence. Yes. I'm not going to represent Sandy's position on like Conforto being on the executive board, but when the stories that I wrote a couple weeks ago about players like Conforto and Cole giving their points about what they thought was important in the labor negotiations, a team president, probably every team president would be like, oh, geez, I do not agree with what you're saying right now. You are part of the problem. I'm just saying that's a negative for teams, not a positive. Not like a deal breaker, but it's not a positive. And furthermore, it's interesting because Lindor, I asked a Mets source actually last week, didn't write about this. So this is actually exclusive content to the Shea Anything podcast, so I'm about to say. I said to a Mets person, I said, is it problematic for you guys that coincidentally both Lindor and Conforto are on the 8-member executive board? What are the odds? Is that going to hurt you guys in negotiations? Because the way they look at it, it's not just about them. It's about the whole brotherhood of players and getting the most money you can so it trickles down to other contracts and comps. And the answer I got back was maybe that's a problem. No one's saying it explicitly, but these are two guys, given their positions, I'm sure, have some sense of responsibility to just maximize their dollars wherever they play.
Such a shame because team presidents, owners, whatever, may view that as a negative. But from my point of view, just as people, it makes me view them more positively. Anybody who shows up somewhere and decides I could just live my life or I could make a difference, like I respect the people who volunteer for more work. And that's what both of them have done.
I agree with you, but notice that if you're just to think of it, and I'm not saying how Sandy Alderson would feel, to be very clear, I'm saying how management type almost universally would feel. It's like extra work could be, I'll do more community work for the community relations department of my team, or it could be, I will fight my team at the negotiating table as a member of the union's leadership. You know the difference? I agree with you. It makes them more interesting people to talk to. But again, like, you have a labor war coming up. It really sucks to tell you that I have spoken to 2 prominent GMs over the past 4 or 5 days who are sure that there will be no baseball at the beginning of 2022 season, that there will be a work stoppage. And they're like, oh, they're dreading it. And so if you're Lindor and Conforto, you're 2 of the 8, faces of that.
Yeah, if I became a Major League Baseball player, I just have this feeling that I would just want to make as much money and play this fun sport and not care about, like, I just respect I understand your point, but I view it totally differently, having no skin in the game. But the problem is that if you do have skin in the game and you're an owner or a team president, I could see how you view it as a con.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, that's going to get more tense as we move through the season.
Any other, back to the previous segment, Jeff, I didn't miss it. Any other extension possibilities? Stroman, Syndergaard, Trevor May, Sam McWilliams, Jordan Yamamoto.
Yes, we can also exclusively report that the Yamamoto extension is close. Not done. No, I'm just kidding. There is no Yamamoto extension. No, I think they're only working on these 2 right now. Is that not enough for you? $500 million in contract negotiations going on at one time. You want more?
Or who are you talking to? Are you talking to Jeff, me, the fan base?
Less you than the other 2, although you were the one in the position of posing the question. Syndergaard's a possibility at some point. Stroman is a free agent to be. I don't see it. Not on the radar, really.
I think Stroman's going to have a really good year, and I think that's going to become an interesting conversation if he does.
Could be.
He's making a lot of money this year too, which complicates things because he'll want more than that every year. So anyway, that's for a different time.
He's got the chance to put himself in a position to make a lot of money with a good year, like you said.
That's true. So the pitching depth, Andy, you were watching Lucchesi pitch today. Suddenly, he and Peterson have kind of been thrust into the position of being in the rotation. And by the way, a point that I haven't heard made, thank goodness if you're a Met fan, and thank goodness if you're Sandy Alderson that you signed Taijuan Walker. Not only has he looked really impressive, but he just makes you feel better without Carrasco, because you got a 3 or a 2, depending on how you view Stroman. So I think the Mets are in fine shape. The level of not panic, I won't call it that. I don't think it was panic, but the reaction to Carrasco's injury was like, are the Mets still a good team? Like, do they have a chance? And like, I get that every game in 162 ends up being valued the same. Every game is just as important as the other, whether it's in May or September, but they're going to be fine. Like, Syndergaard and Carrasco will come back and they will have a really good rotation, I think. And I think they're a good enough team to get, like, Lucchesi and Peterson are going to be okay. They'll get there. What do you think of the depth at the back end? Do you think that's a concern?
Well, you mentioned Taijuan Walker, first of all, before I answer your main question. You talk about people who have interesting other things that they're onto. I'm supposed to talk to Taijuan Walker later today about his entry into this NFT and crypto
good luck
space.
with that. Good luck with that.
I've spent some days reading up on it, and I talked to an expert this morning. I really was like interested in that. You know, the NBA is selling
NBA Top Shot.
Did you know what NFT was before like last week? Had you heard that?
I still don't know what NFT is, but I know what NBA Top Shop is.
That's NFT.
Top Shot. Are those the same thing?
Yeah. Okay. You buy a highlight package or something.
Right.
And you spend a premium on it, and you buy it in Bitcoin or some other kind of cryptocurrency. You know what? Let's just not get bogged down in this. It's interesting.
Right, but Taijuan Walker's into it. Yeah.
But he's the first MLB player who's in that space. And I'm interested to talk to him about that. A lot of these people are very interesting outside what they do on TV for a living that we see. So it's always, I'm agreeing with your comment before about the labor leaders. It's interesting to look at these guys from a different angle sometimes, which is why I agreed to do that story on Walker. But anyway, I think that they're in pretty good shape with the rotation depth. You know, something that Anthony Recker said on BNNY did make me think last week on this topic, because I was kind of defending them. And I still mean when I said, like, look, their pro scouting department did a good job. They went out and they got these guys, the Lucchese's and Yamamoto's and da-da-da, which is good. It's way better than last year when as discussed many times, like they didn't know who was starting in 2 days last year. There came a point where there was no rotation. So that's not going to be an issue this year probably. But if you're trying to win a championship, you don't have, this is the part that Rex said, like the Dodgers have like Dustin May at number 6 or 7 in their rotation. You know, Gonsolin and David Price, like, does he have a spot in the rotation? I know I'm talking about like a super team, but my point is even the Yankees have Herman, Garcia, you know, there's like all these like high end guys, and the Mets have like, all right, Jordan Yamamoto will give you 4 1/3 and he'll keep you in the ball game. So the Mets have the guys, the human beings to pitch now, but they don't have the high end depth that there are other. If they want to see themselves as in a league of the Yankees and Dodgers, that's an area of the roster where they're not.
Well, did you see were you on the show that he actually did his 5 options and listed them?
No.
You might have been I think you were on the day before. He ended up listing, I was like, Rec, can you come up with your 5 best options, like a Montgomery, Yamamoto, et cetera? And he said, sure. His list ended up looking much different. He had Franklin Kilome 3, which is proving exactly what you're saying. And he had Sam McWilliams 4. He was like,
wait, starting?
As starting options, not in the rotation. I'm not talking about a rotation. I'm talking about the top 5 options after the rotation.
Okay.
So he didn't have Yamamoto on the list. He had, I think it started with, it was like Peterson, Lucchese. So it was anything after those top 3. Then it was Kilome, McWilliams, Montgomery. And he was saying that, like, exactly what you were saying. He doesn't like Yamamoto's stuff. And Montgomery has not been good in a long time. Just because he's done it and like you recognize his name doesn't mean that he's good pitching depth. He was like, I've seen Kilome pitch and he has nasty stuff. He hasn't proven he can do it well. I've seen McWilliams pitch. He has nasty stuff. Can't find the strike zone. But I'd rather have that than the like just veteran guy who anyone could have had that the Mets decided to sign, which is exactly what you're saying.
Well,
and a point that I find interesting.
Right. So what he's doing there is choosing like ceiling over experience or depth. So that is in the mode of what the Yankees and Dodgers have. So I see that's an interesting point that Rec made then. Like, and it goes to how there aren't really starting pitchers anymore beyond the team's top 3. Sometimes some teams are more obviously like further along than others, but the way the game is trending, like a Franklin Kilome, you go, what? But it's like, no, you really just have to stretch him out to 60 pitches to start a game, understanding that you got to piggyback behind him and things like that. So I like, you might say like, well, let's do like, if you need a spot start, let's start Kilome. He goes 3 innings, back him up with May in the 4th, you know, Lugo if he's healthy in the 6th or 7th. Like you could do it like that rather than just say, let's have Joey Lucchese go as long as he can with his okay stuff. I think that's interesting. But even still, and so this is what the Yankees and Dodgers basically do. Even still, though, like Killamay, McWilliams are like bootleg May and Gonsolin, right? It's like I see what Rex going with that, but it's not the same caliber.
Well, he's going with what he's got.
Well, no, but and that's what I'm saying from the Mets standpoint.
Right,
Rex's idea is, okay, I'm gonna match up our stuff guys with their stuff guys, and you end up with like the Dodgers are here, and for those of you listening on audio, I'm holding my hand up to a high altitude, and the Mets are here with my second hand is lower. I'm doing a gesture that indicates a disparity.
It's fascinating video. I'm so sorry that you guys can't see it. Okay, let's go to our 3 batter rule, and let's go quickly for Edwin Diaz is the first one. He's looked pretty nasty to me for the most part. I think he's solidified as a clean inning closer, probably a 1-inning guy, and you go into the season hoping he looks like the second half of last year. Familia and Betances, and in your mailbag last year, somebody asked you, or the second 3 batter rule, somebody asked you if it's a sure thing that Betances makes the roster. If you look at both of them, and the point that you made in the column is that they're both sunk costs. So I guess it's no sure thing. Is Familia definitely going to make the team? Is Betances definitely going to make the team? How do you think the Mets view that?
When that reader asked that question last week, it was like, good question. I've been thinking about it. Every time I watch Betances not look good, I'm like, is he really going to be on this team? Everyone's like, oh, Betances is a lock on the team. And so I got that question, and I asked, the digging I did was more on Betances than Familia, but in theory, the same question could apply. I think they're probably on the team, but the thing is, like some of these things, like the injuries to Drew Smith and Vizcaino and stuff, like they have probably helped these guys' cases to break camp with the team because the Mets have some bullpen options in camp that they like. So at a certain point, it's like, why does Betances assume to have one of those jobs if you have other people you think will be more effective? I don't think they're there yet, but it is not a sure thing that Betances will be on the Mets this year. It's not. That's what I'm saying. It's likely, I would say. But I think what concerns the evaluators that are watching him right now is that he appears to be somewhat close to max effort with his delivery, and his velocity is not following. So it's like the opposite of like easy cheese. He's like trying to get it there. It's not getting there, which is unfortunate, but where they are right now. And again, it is a sunk cost. It's naturally easier for Alderson to write off a Brody sunk cost than one of his own, I think is a natural human thing. To say like, oh, Brody signed this guy. Brody's gone. $6 million for spending either way. They don't like him. They'll release him. They're not there, but let's call it a non-zero possibility.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fascinating. And I think you're right about the Brody thing, because that was going to be my follow-up. Because if you're Sandy, think about, I mean, the Betances signing feels like a different world, doesn't it? Because that was like a big signing for Mets fans, finalizing their bullpen last offseason or 2 off seasons ago now. And it was like, why didn't the Yankees really go hard after him, considering he's been great there? Who knows? Maybe he's destined to be a Met. And that was the budget they were dealing with. This is Brody's big signing. And now you're living a world where like Trevor May feels like an afterthought in an offseason with a lot of other big headlines. The Mets have a very different looking budget. You have a different team president and different guy making decisions, and Betances is the afterthought. So yeah, really interesting. And he, again, just doesn't look the same. And I've always been a little curious as to why a team like the Yankees would be like, all right, thanks for everything, man.
That's right.
That tells you something.
Sure does.
When a big market team has a player leave in free agency who has succeeded with them, who isn't 40, and says, all right, thanks. That kind of you should be skeptical when that happens. So he just hasn't looked like the same guy. And he always has weird spring trainings, but you've done some interesting reporting on what's looked good and what hasn't. And it's almost worse that there are some things that are working right now and some things that aren't. Mm-hmm. Whereas when he was in his prime with the Yankees, was like, well, I'll be fine. This is just Dellin throwing 88 right now.
Yeah.
He'll get to 98.
It's taken a dark turn pretty quickly because his first spring training outing, he was at 91-ish, I think, sitting around 90, 91. And it was like, oh, that's good. That's more than he used to do with the Yankees in his first outing, but it's kind of like maintained or gone backwards since. Rojas keeps talking about how the ball isn't cutting when they don't want it to cut and how his stuff is truer to where they want it to be. And, they're seeing some positives, emphasizing them publicly, of course. But we'll see. Well, I mean, to his credit, he went and did the whole, he never done anything like this before. He was always just a guy that could rely on his stuff. And last winter, to try to save his career, I think he probably went to one of these places like not Driveline, but he went to a place where he worked on his biomechanics and his release point and all his stuff and all the Adam Ottavino, high-tech cameras around him and all this stuff that pitchers are increasingly doing now to help with their velocity and their stuff. And so far, we haven't really seen at least the velocity piece show up.
All right, Andy. Well, this has been another good half hour of the Shea Anything podcast. We will finish recording and then not speak to each other until the next episode starts, and exactly then. What
about during the BNNY? Certainly not before.
No, we tolerate each other during those half hours too.
During, as I said, not before or after.
Right, of course. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back with you next week. We're about 10 days away from opening day, so that's fun. Leaves just about 1-2 shows maybe before we get to baseball that matters and that counts.
How about that? I like to measure my life in Shea Anything increments. We're 2 Shea Anythings away from this big event. Is how I generally, my birthday, Christmas.
Yeah. Jeff's saying 1. This is probably 1 next week. Let's not sell you a bill of goods. Yep.
Opening day is what? Is it on a Tuesday? Is April 1st a Tuesday? No, Thursday. Well, anyway, I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited to see what will hopefully be a normal 162-game baseball season. I really am looking forward to it. I really am. I earnestly just cannot wait to see things like how do the Yankees and Mets look. They're both had really good springs. Both the New York teams have come through the spring very nicely, and I'm very anxious to see how they actually look in the regular season. I'm very excited for opening day, Doug.
Good. Well, that gets rid of some of that anxiety, I hope.
I think it increases it when you're looking forward to something you'll kept up about.
That's a different type of anxiety. Okay, everybody, enough about anxiety. Go enjoy your days or nights, and we'll talk to you next week.